tell you how pleased I am with the turnout, with the interest in Common Core in Ohio and the future of our children, our state, and our country.
Look, the U.S. Department of Education, the Obama administration is just pretending that there are federal laws that just brushing them aside. They're pretending that they don't exist, that they're doing exactly what federal law and the Constitution tells them they can't do. The third piece of research that we looked at was the cost. Even though the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has spent about $200 million, and they've given it to everybody, all the major players around education, they've been funding to advocate for this. But what they didn't do was do any cost projection on what's going to cost states and localities to implement it. In fact, Pioneer was the first institution in the country to do a cost projection. We got a guy named Ted Barber, who had worked in the U.S. Department of Education under the first Bush administration and in the first administration of President Clinton. So he had worked for both Republicans and Democrats, and he had a lot of experience on both Capitol Hill, but also testing at the state level. And what he and his researchers came up with was a projected cost of implementation at the state and local level nationally of $16 billion. Again, that 90% of that will be picked up by state and local governments. None of the players around this bothered to tell anybody what it was going to cost. After we released ours, the Fordham Institute, big Ohio player, they came out with their own cost analysis. The only problem for them, which was brought to light in a legislative hearing in Indiana by a state senator from rural Indiana, the Fordham Institute neglected to include the largest cost driver, which is the multi-year technology costs. So it was pretty embarrassing for them on the floor of the Senate to have to explain why they left out the biggest cost driver. And Pioneer is a big advocate of school choice. The fact is that whether it's charter schools or vocational technical schools, or increasingly through school choice programs like in Indiana, voucher programs and archdiocese schools, many archdiocese schools across the country have adopted Common Core. The fact is that if all these different school choice options are being herded into the same set of standards or the same set of tests, there isn't going to be any school choice at all. And in fact, most of the big drivers behind Common Core, the Governor's Association, the Council of Chief State School Officers, American Federation of Teachers, Achieving, all the big players from Washington, D.C. who are driving this, over 25 or 30 years, not only are they not school choice advocates, they have been hostile to school choice. They are in no way, shape, or form considered on the vanguard of pushing for parental choice. So I've given you a lot of bad news, but there is some good news too. And one of the most immediate ones is the example in Indiana, where the governor has just been sort of pushed into signing a law that pulls them out. There's other states, there's over 200 bills that are beginning to circulate through state legislatures. Oklahoma, their state senate just in the last week has approved a bill to pull out following their House of Representatives. There's a variety of different states, including Utah and Alabama and Florida and Oklahoma and others that have pulled out of the national testing. Texas from the beginning, I mean, I think everyone should say a little prayer for Texas tonight, because from the beginning they said, we're not doing this. Don't mess with Texas. We're going to get the best standards experts we can get, and we're going to elevate our standards higher. So for my money, Texas now has the highest academic standards in the country. There's a lot of pushback going on all over the country. The fact is that we can't respond to all of the inquiries that we have to speak because, you know, whether it's Salt Lake City or Indianapolis or Nashville or Tallahassee, moms in particular, and when you look over at the audience, it's almost all across the country, 70–80% of the people in the audience are moms, because the fact is that this is a genuine grassroots-driven effort. The moms and the grandmothers who do a lot of the work and the day in, day out work with their kids are seeing this poor quality. They're not happy about it. They can't get any questions answered. When they talk about opting their kids out of the testing, they get told that they're going to be suspended, or all kinds of things that you wouldn't expect from, well, I guess maybe we would expect that from public officials these days, but unfortunately, these kinds of things are only driving more and more animosity against Common Core across the country. I would encourage you to gather as much information you can on the topic. There's a great panel of folks here tonight, but there's a lot of information. Again, I can't underscore enough how impressive it is to see how well organized these moms are over social media and through groups all over the country. And you're seeing it whether it's in blue states or red states. People are really mobilizing because they're realizing that as bad as the Healthcare Act was, at least that was passed through Congress. At least it was validated by the U.S. Supreme Court. We may not like it, but Common Core never had any bills in Congress. There was never any national discussion. The people and parents were systematically bypassed, and state legislators were systematically bypassed. So again, thanks again. I appreciate it.
Data collection. However, Common Core is part of a much larger scheme than that. To get the race to the top money, and y'all sold your souls for it, as did we in Georgia. I actually work in Georgia, the organization's in Washington. But you had to agree to adopt these standards, to adopt the national assessments that go along with the standards, and to build out your big databases, which had been in construction, under construction since the early 2000s. This predates the Obama administration. But, so it's the Common Core, it's all connected. Someday we can track children from preschool to high school and from high school to college and college to career. We want to, look at this, we want to see more states build comprehensive systems that track students from pre-K through college and then link student data to workforce data. Remember, this is a workforce development model. It is not an educational model. It is designed to build a workforce. We want to know whether Johnny participated in an early learning program and then completed college on time, and whether those things have any bearing on his earnings as an adult. To know this, what do we have to know? Everything about Johnny. Everything Johnny has ever done from the time he toddled off to preschool to the time he retires, we're supposed to know about it. The workforce development model came to a large extent in the modern era. It goes back a long way, but in the modern era it came largely from a man named Mark Tucker, who is head of something called the National Center on Education and the Economy. And he wrote a famous or infamous letter to Hillary Clinton back in the early 90s when her husband had just been elected president, saying what they should do about the education system and how they should make all this work. And he said, this is what we want to do. It should remold the entire American system for human resource development. Seamless system that goes through school, post-secondary education, and the workplace. This is the idea. And of course, if you're going to do this, you have to have data. If you're going to be planning everything that starts when kids are very young, or even in Oregon prenatally, and follow them and track them all the way through the workforce, then you have to have the data. You have to have the technology. Now, how are the feds involved in this? Well, and Jamie alluded to this with the standards themselves. The stimulus bill, which was 2009, which was where they spent almost $1 trillion for no apparent effect, plus the Race to the Top program, both of those bills required the states to build out these data systems in order to get Race to the Top money, or in order to get, under the stimulus bill, something called the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund. And remember, this was a time of deep recession, and so the states were panicking, and they said, okay, well, we will do this, just tell us where to sign, and they signed. So to get that, they had to do this. Now, Common Core is part of this scheme. The data have to be built identically. The data systems have to be built identically, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And the data will go into the database. The Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act is the federal statute that supposedly governs student privacy. It was originally passed in 1974. And it did protect student privacy to some extent until 2 years ago in January, when the Obama administration gutted it by regulation, not by statute. They didn't get Congress to pass it, they passed a regulation, promulgated a regulation that gutted the statute. And now under FERPA, without getting into all the details of it, now under FERPA, you can, whether it's the Department of Education, U.S. Department, whether it's the State Department of Education, any of those people, they can share personally identifiable student data with literally anyone in the world as long as they say the right words. They have to say this is in connection with an audit or evaluation of an education program. I can make anything sound like it's an audit or evaluation of an education program. So they can share it with anybody. Parents will have no right to object because parents will not know that it is happening. The U.S. Department says that they're really not that interested in setting up a national database, but look at the things that they're doing. They are funding multiple initiatives to encourage interstate and interagency data sharing. In my view as a parent, if the Department of Education has some information on my child, it ought to stay there. It ought not be going to the Department of Labor. It ought not be going to Health and Human Services. It ought not, whether it's within the state or whether it's at the federal level. That's education data. It's supposed to be for education. But the U.S. Department is funding with our money all of these things, and I just picked out a few. I mean, there are dozens of these initiatives that they have. Workforce data quality is to share education data with labor data so that they can, of course, develop the workforce. Common education data standards is to get the states to all use the same data standards so they can share it. Digital passport is for kids who move across state lines. Assessment interoperability framework is so they can share things about assessments across state lines. Now, what kinds of data are we talking about? The National Education Data Model, which is connected with the U.S. Department of Education, recommends, it does not require yet, but it recommends the collection of over 400 data points on each child. I don't know how far Ohio is down that road. Some states have gone further than others. But these are some of the things that they want to put in a child's record. And obviously test scores, that sort of stuff. Disciplinary records, I like this, because remember, none of this is ever going away. If your child has a rough 6th grade year and gets suspended for a couple of days, well, it's going to be there forever. And it's the end of the clean slate, because if the child moves to a different school, in their view, everybody at that school now should be able to see everything the child has ever done. So, I personally know people in my very own family who were awfully glad they had a clean slate when they went to a new school. But that's going to be gone. Now they want to see everything that's ever happened, and it will stay there forever. And so all these things, some states collect Social Security numbers and use them routinely as identifiers. They're not supposed to, but they have a system based on the Social Security numbers. Sources of income, life insurance, all this stuff, it just goes on and on and on. Everything they could think of, they put in there. And the states are expected, they're not required yet, but they are expected to build out. Utility and privacy of data are goals that are at war with one another. If the data are useful, they cannot be anonymized. You cannot protect anonymization, because the more data points you have, the more you can data match. And if you know the kid's date of birth, you don't know his name, but then you know other things, such as whether he has an IEP or whether he's on free lunch, or what grade is he in. And there are all sorts of examples in the education world of where they have been able to data match and identify kids with upwards of 80, 85, 90%, 100% accuracy. And if you're collecting 400 or anywhere close to 400 data points, data matching is not a problem. To get money into the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund, the states had to agree to build their data systems identically. They have to follow these 12 elements of this other act that was passed some time ago. So now, why would they be doing that? Why do they require that the state data systems all be the same? Well, we'll find, here we go. Because there is a federal statute that prohibits the federal government from maintaining a national student database. Is it starting to make sense? And he says, we collect billions of records of data. We're pulling data from everywhere, tens of thousands of places. He's talking about that fine-grained data. Common Core is the glue that ties everything together.
There's a medicine out there that we could give to you that would improve your health. We'll give it to you, but we have to first think we do no harm, right? You don't want to give somebody a medicine that's also maybe going to harm them. So when you look at standards, you want to be sure that the standards that you're putting forth for a nation of children are not going to do any harm. So now we're going to dig into some of the standards. This is the mathematical practices, and these apply to actually every grade, K through 12. So now that you are all experts on child development, I want you to read through some of these standards and tell me if you would ever put these on a kindergartner's standards. Look at number 2, reason abstractly and quantitatively. I like this, attend to precision. So this is my son. He said, Mommy, I stacked up the blocks. The big ones are on the bottom. Here's 2nd grade. I actually read this to my 2nd grader, Kate, and she burst out laughing. I thought that was so funny. I said, does this sound like your classroom? I'm not going to make them developmentally appropriate. Please tell me they work, right? Please tell me that you piloted these, there's research behind them, you know. So when you look at the Common Core standards, do they have little names after it with dates that say, this was researched here, this was piloted here, this was done here? No, they don't. The research that they'll say they're research-based. When I looked into the research, it's really just statistics. So what I think of a child's first day in kindergarten under Common Core is that it's really his first meeting with the Human Resource Department of the global economy workforce. He doesn't know it. His parents don't know it. He's in those boring orientations that you have to do to work at a company. This is what kindergarten looks like in a developmentally appropriate kindergarten. And that's it. Thank you very much.
We need to know what's going on behind the curtain. From previous experience with testing and curriculum schemes, it's not hard to ascertain what the Common Core people are doing. They pretend to offer, at a price, access to the power of learning, but then they withhold that learning and they hoard the power. They first create a national panic with scary content jargon, with premature placement of difficult topics and exotic examples, with reminders that we're behind other countries. Never mind that our students fell behind because of previous worthless but expensive responses to the last panic attacks. Second, with panic and jargon in place, Common Core people dumb down essential content in early grades, claiming to promote readiness and understanding and rigor. I will return to the issue of content weakness shortly. Third, the knowledge hoarders develop reassuring and foggy themes such as real-world modernization and technological innovation. The fog will help hide or excuse the dumbing down of basic curriculum content. We clearly see the basis of this garbage, which is simply insecure human nature. Only insecurity explains why people posing as caring saints want to hurt children. A proper elementary foundation begins with number, including counting forwards and backwards, by ones and then by twos and threes and fours and fives, and fluent recall of arithmetic facts. Common Core people may claim that fluent arithmetic fact recall is what they intend by their vague language, but without clear statements, the standards are open to abuse by publishers. Then one of the most dangerous goals of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics will be realized. The original 1987 draft of NCTM's curriculum standards proposed delay of fluent recall of easy addition facts until 2nd grade. Fluent recall of facts can be attained by simply reading a set of fact statements aloud each day in 1st grade, both for addition and multiplication. And understanding may come later, it may be there right away, but it comes eventually. Fluent recall of facts makes higher mathematics easier to develop and to master. So why does Common Core call for delay? Also, why are the elementary mathematics vocabulary lists so weak? Also, why is there no telling time on the clock face or to the nearest minute in 1st grade, which we have done in lab schools and student teaching situations and so on? Identifying coins and their values, learning traditional arithmetic processes, all that sets the stage for algebra. Why make arithmetic processes so complicated and pointless? Is pencil paperwork expected, or will the schools cave to early calculator use prematurely? The National Council of Teachers of Mathematics has long been subversively peddling junk philosophies and practices and undermining effective strategies. Who here is a life member of that group? One of the worst of the junk has been in the impossible quest for that magic learning approach that will cement an idea in a student's mind right away. Cognitive psychologists who study scientifically how people learn, recall, apply Know that each new lesson is but a first draft. 80% is gone in 24 hours no matter how well you teach it. Okay? And that first draft is efficiently tidied up in subsequent days after sleep has provided natural digestion of learning. There is no hurry. As to methodology, why is there no mention of ongoing review in Common Core? Now, what do I mean by ongoing review? Imagine your Buckeye basketball coach says, okay, team, Monday we're only going to dribble. Tuesday we're only going to shoot free throws, no dribbling. Wednesday we're going to be practicing three-pointers, no free throws, no dribbling. On Thursday we practice inbound plays, and then Friday we're going to play the University of Illinois. No successful coach of athletics or director of music or theater would do anything so ridiculous. With good coaching, each day's practice is mostly cumulative review with some time set aside for moving some aspect to some new level. Yet the ridiculous fragmented approach is how most people in the United States learned mathematics, and consequently why we have such national illiteracy and phobia regarding mathematics. Mathematics learning issues are issues of Judeo-Christian faith. Naked and you clothed me, hungry and you fed me, discouraged, and you gave me a way out. Inasmuch as ye have done it unto the least of these, my brethren, ye have done it unto me. These issues are civil rights issues as well. The degrading Jim Crow laws once told some people that they were inferior. These laws are gone, but the human insecurity prompting such degradation is not. Jim Crow laws have been replaced by mathematics classes devoid of clear, direct instruction, empty of the efficient Saxon exercise structure, and bereft of helpful assessments. This time the targets for degradation are children of every race, every faith, and every background short of extreme privilege. These classes, taught per those recommendations, will bind the minds and spirits of today's children more firmly and more destructively than the coal mine company store bound the incomes of the immigrant miners, binding more firmly and destructively than the iron chains bound the hands and feet of the slaves of early America. A nation at risk, an act of war.
Okay, how are y'all doing? Okay, I can't resist. The grammarian in me wants to say that you're doing well. But if you're defeating the Common Core, you're doing good. But let's do something fun. Are y'all ready for a Common Core pop quiz? Okay, very well. Even if you're not, I'm going to give it. So this is a standard. This is a Common Core standard. We hear a lot about standards, we hear about them in general, and we hear how this is really a good set of standards, and districts are left to do whatever kind of curriculum they want to, and we're raising the bar, are we not, from what Ohio had before by these new Common Core standards. Well, here's one. This is Common Core RF.K.3b, which stands for Reading Foundation Standard, Kindergarten, 3rd Standard B. Associate the long and short sounds with the common spellings, graphemes, for the 5 major vowels. Now you probably think, I'm going to read that again, you probably think you know what that means. Associate the long and short sounds with the common spellings for the 5 major vowels. Oh, one person has got it. So what you think is, okay, we're learning the vowels and we're learning their long and short sounds, right? Read it one more time. Associate the long and short sounds with the common spellings of the 5 major vowels. Okay, so here's your quiz. A is a vowel. How many ways are there to spell the letter A? 1. I don't get that. That's the joke that somebody said the other day. Okay, A, if you're from Canada. Thank you. It's clear now. So, but apparently the authors of the Common Core think that there must be multiple ways to spell those vowels. Well, let's go on to a different standard. This is RF.K.3a, the standard that just comes right before it. Demonstrate basic knowledge of one-to-one letter-sound correspondences by producing the primary sound or many of the most frequent sounds of each consonant. Again, I have to read this again. It's too convoluted to understand. Demonstrate basic knowledge of one-to-one letter-sound correspondences. That's actually okay. You see a letter, it has sounds associated with it, you're pronouncing the letter. No problem there. By producing the primary sound or many of the most frequent sounds of each consonant. What I read many to mean is more than 3. So here's your quiz question. Name me a consonant that has more than 3 sounds. There aren't any. The letter B, for example, has 1 sound, B. The letter P has 1 sound, P. The letter C has 2 main sounds, K as in cook, C as in S as in city. And then in a very few foreign words, like the word cello, you have another sound. Otherwise, C, if it's operating like in the word special, it's operating as a phonogram, not as a single consonant. So what we're saying here is that the people who wrote these standards don't understand the vowels. They don't understand the consonants. What part of the alphabet do they get right? And if they mess up the alphabet, how many more things are they going to end up messing up in the Common Core standards? By the time you get into the upper school, what they're really doing is they're taking away literature from literature class. And so this is where I come up with the phrase, the authors of the Common Core are story killers. Because, and they say this is in the opening pages of the English standards. They don't come out and say, we're trying to take literature out of literature classes. Because that wouldn't be very popular. What they say instead is, well, we're going to have fewer literary texts than have traditionally been the case. And we're going to add in informational texts. And by the time you get to be a senior in high school, you will read 70% informational texts and only 30% literary texts. And I'll tell you what the reasoning is behind that, but here's the effect. They're killing off the great stories of a great people, the American people. What you have to understand about stories is something that Plato taught us over 2,000 years ago. Whoever controls the stories of a society controls the society. It's called the narrative. Whoever writes the stories and is in charge of writing them gets to determine how the regime works. Whoever controls the language controls how the regime works. So when you take away our stories and feed us a bunch of schlock, you're up to something. And so what I hope to do tonight is just to work through the Common Core English standards to expose how ridiculous they are and to give you real evidence, because the other side's always saying, where is the evidence? To give you real evidence about what's going on so you can go out and fight this with your legislators and with your school board members, because these people are elected and they can be unelected. Okay, so here's what they do. Okay, I promised I was going to say something about Ronald Reagan. When you look in Appendix B, you find Ronald Reagan's name, giving a speech. And that's okay. It's okay to have a speech in a literature class because you're studying it as a genre of rhetoric. That's okay. If you were to have one of Ronald Reagan's speeches in your English class as a model speech, which one would you pick? Brandenburg Gate, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Second choice, I think, would be his first inaugural. Some people want to go all the way back to 1964 and his time for choosing speech, but these are his top 3 speeches ever. Maybe fourth would be his farewell address. None of those speeches are the speech that they recommend of Ronald Reagan. The speech that they recommend of Ronald Reagan is this unknown speech that he gave at Warsaw State University. Why? Well, it doesn't become obvious. You don't actually figure out the clue until you look in a Common Core textbook, in which you find, in a unit on the Cold War, an editorial from the New York Times, 1999, on the 10th anniversary of the fall of the wall. And this editorial begins, "The Berlin Wall was bound to fall eventually." You remember how many times the New York Times was saying in 1980, yeah, the wall is going to come down any minute now. So at any rate, that's the first line. The Berlin Wall was bound to fall eventually. But that it came down as bloodlessly as it did 10 years ago this week is largely a tribute to one leader. Today, Mikhail Gorbachev is a political pariah in Russia and increasingly forgotten in the West. But history will remember him generously for his crucial role in ending the Cold War and pulling back the Iron Curtain that Stalin drew across Europe in 1945. Reagan's name is not mentioned in this New York Times editorial, surprisingly. But 20 pages later, not in the unit on the Cold War, in which Reagan is never mentioned, you do have this obscure speech from Moscow State University, introduced with this in the textbook. So this is the editor's writing. Led by Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviets were blazing through the greatest changes they had seen since the 1917 revolution. Although reforms were rapidly taking root, they were not far enough from communist ideology for Reagan. In this excerpt, notice how Reagan restrains his strongly anti-communist sentiments while still extolling the ideals he represents. So that's how you remember Reagan, right? Constantly restraining his strongly anti-communist sentiments and not getting in Gorbachev's way so that he could bring down the wall, which he was going to do anyway. The children who would be reading this as sophomores in high school are 16. Common Core math, what's their birthday? Okay, nobody gives me an answer. I think it's 1998. The point is, unless they've talked a lot to their parents or their grandparents, they don't know a thing about Reagan. And so history is being rewritten, the story is being retold, and the story is within our living memory. This isn't something distant. This isn't the Great Depression. This is something we knew and saw, and it's being retold in front of our very eyes. So you take away Shakespeare, you take away Mark Twain, you give false ideas about Reagan, you replace beautiful stories like Pride and Prejudice, which, you find the name Pride and Prejudice in the Common Core standards. You will find it. When you go to the actual textbook, it's nothing other than a recommended reading. Folks, we got to care about our stories, and we got to take them back. We got to take our stories back. We have to take our schools back, and I hope that's a road to taking this nation back.